Hi.
I am Yehuda ben Moshe. I'm Elmet Herald of the East, and if you don't know what that means, you will by the end of the class. This is Book Heraldry 100. This is the introductory class for the new program that I have, and I'm going to turn off the video camera and put on the slide, which is really much more useful because you can really only stare at my face for so long. Where's the correct thing? There it is.
I know, but how are we going to know when to take a drink if we don't see your face?
Well, you'll just have to time it. And okay, everybody should now have the Book Heraldry 100 introduction screen, and if the image is jumping as people are talking, what you can do is click on my screen in the bottom. You'll get a little blue border around it, and that will lock the image to my feed. Otherwise, it will jump to whoever is currently talking. So, as I said, I'm Yehuda ben Moshe. I'm Elmet Herald, and this is Book Heraldry 100. So, what do SCA heralds do? It kind of falls into several categories. There's book heraldry, there's voice heraldry, and there's other stuff. Book heraldry deals with names in armory. Voice heralds deals with things like courts, tournaments, and in some kingdoms there's silent heraldry. And then there are a few other things like order of precedences and regalia that's handled by heralds. So armory is a broad term. It talks about devices and badges. Not every kingdom does silent stuff. We don't really have much of a one in the East, although I think both Middle and Ethelmark have strong silent heraldry programs. So there's a lot of different things we do. This class is going to address book heraldry only. We are planning future classes on other topics. So this is actually the premier class of what I'm calling East Kingdom Herald University. Doesn't mean it's limited to the East Kingdom. People are welcome from anywhere in this society to join us. And this is kind of where what I'm planning on. This is Book Heraldry 100, which is the intro kind of to administrative aspects and intro to pretty much everything. We're going to have another class, Book Heraldry 101, which will deal with the details of the paperwork, how to fill out the paperwork, how many copies you need to send, where to send it. That will probably be taught by our submissions herald, Alice McIntosh, Eastern Crown Herald. We're planning a court heraldry class on how to be a baronial herald, on how to organize baronial court. We're planning a series of armory classes. The first of these is Armory 101, which I will be teaching next Monday. As well, that'll cover basic rules of armory, blazoning, things like that. Armory 102 will talk about charge group theory, which is kind of a key concept in SCA heraldry, as well as our style rules. These are the rules that deal with what it is you can put on a device and how you can organize a device. Armory 103 is going to cover the conflict rules and basic conflict checking. And then I'm hoping to have some more senior people teach an advanced conflict checking class and a class on individually attested patterns. And if you don't know what any of these topics are, that's okay. We will discuss many of them here. Apparently that slide's unfinished. We're also gonna have Names 101 is going to be the introduction to names. And we're also planning on a number of other name classes. Names 102 is going to be basic of name documentation, how to document a name. Names 103 is going to be conflict rules and basic conflict checking of names. And then the advanced classes I'm hoping to do is, again, an advanced conflict checking class and an intermediate heraldic research class. But those are in the future. So first thing we're going to talk about is the organization of the college. This is something that occasionally confuses people. We have what's called the society level, sometimes called the laurel level. This is also known as the College of Arms. The Laurel Sovereign of Arms is the chief heraldic officer of the SCA. He's currently Master Gabriel Kjotvason. He has two main deputies, Pelican and Wreath, and he is, the head of heraldry in the SC. His two deputies are the Pelican Sovereign of Arms and the Wreath Sovereign of Arms. Pelican handles name submissions. Every name that's submitted in the SCA ends up crossing her desk, and she's the one that makes decision on what's registered and what's not. It's currently Juliana De Luna, although she is currently looking for a replacement because her term is about to end. The Wreath Sovereign of Arms handles all the armory submissions. Every piece of armory that's submitted in the SCA goes across her desk. It's currently Mistress Emma de Featherstone. So those are the three sovereigns of arms. There are other officers at the Laurel level. You can see the full list of who they are and what they do at the link there. By the way, don't write down any of these links. You will need to know exactly one link for all of this class, and that'll be at the very end. And that link will tell you where to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, or in PDF form or in PowerPoint form. You can then look at any links that you need. So some of the other officers that you may need to know about are Clarion, who's education, handles education, Palimpsest, who handles rules and modifications to the rules. Those two officers are currently held by the same person. Morseless Herald, who administers what's called the Ordinary and Armorial. We'll talk about that later. Ragged Staff Herald is the file clerk. Codex is the web minister, and there's a number of others. Then each kingdom has its own organization. This is called the College of Heralds. The head of the College of Heralds of each kingdom is the Kingdom Principal Herald. In our case, in the East, that's Brigantia Principal Herald, and you can just see his back in the background of Kaylee's video feed. For those of you from out of kingdom, each kingdom has its own Principal Herald. The other important things you need to know is book heralds are the internal and/or external submissions herald, and apparently we have one such individual in the class right now. And this is the people that actually handle the name and armory submissions. How exactly that's broken up amongst them varies from kingdom to kingdom, but some kingdoms only have one, some have multiple. And then there's other staff heralds that vary by kingdom. For example, I am Elmet Herald, which makes me the East Kingdom Heraldic Education Deputy. That's my staff office in the East Kingdom College of Heralds. And then below the kingdom level, you have the local branch heralds and heralds at large, which is just a herald who doesn't serve any particular branch. So that's the overall organization. We have the concept of herald ranks. Pretty much everyone uses the first four: Pursuivant, Herald, Herald Extraordinary, Sovereign of Arms. Some kingdoms have more ranks: Macer, Cornet, Pursuivant Extraordinary, maybe something else. Not every kingdom uses them. How they're used varies by kingdom. In some kingdoms, a rank is awarded to the person as they advance. I know Atlantia, for example, does it that way. You start out as a Cornet or a Macer or whatever it is. You take tests, you gain more experience, you move up the ranks, you become a Pursuivant, then you become a Herald, and that's your rank. The other kingdoms, like here in the East, ranks are linked exclusively to offices. I am Elmet Herald, therefore my rank currently is Herald. I'm also my local group Pursuivant, and our office, the group office, is a Pursuivant office. So if I stop being Elmet and go to just being my group Herald, then I'm ranked as a Pursuivant. We really don't care about the ranks here in the East as much as some other kingdoms do. However, there are two ranks that are society-wide and are important. The first is Sovereign of Arms. This is reserved for Laurel and for his two deputies, Wreath and Pelican. No one else gets to be a Sovereign of Arms. If it's held by a man, then it's a King of Arms. If it's held by a woman, it's Queen of Arms. Collectively, it's Sovereign of Arms. The other rank is Herald Extraordinary. This is something that's awarded by either Laurel or by a Kingdom Principal Herald. In a few kingdoms, it's awarded by the Crown, but that's, probably not the correct practice. It's awarded for significant service to the College of Arms and allows you to register and use a personal heraldic title. This is a fairly big deal. Pretty much anyone who's a Herald Extraordinary has done a lot of important service to the society. It's probably similar level to like a peerage. It doesn't carry the same precedence, but it requires about as much of a time commitment and time in service and contribution as something like a pelican. Heraldic titles. Any heraldic title has to be registered with the College of Arms as what's called a non-personal name. And if it's a personal title, then it's registered to an individual. If it's a title associated with the office, it's registered to the branch for whom that office serves. So my title, Elmet Herald, belongs to the East Kingdom. It's registered to the Kingdom of the East. We're currently in the process of registering a office title for my local canton for my office there. It's going to be Billet Percevant once it's registered. So that title is registered to the canton of Lions End, where I live. However, if someone has a personal heraldic title, for example, Alice McIntosh, who's our Eastern Crown Herald, is also a Herald Extraordinary, and she has the title Ogress Herald. That title is registered to her personally. One thing with titles is they can be used as a form of address. You can call someone by their title by combining it with their given name. So Master Gabriel Kjotvason can be called Gabriel Laurel. Master Ryan there in the background could be called Ryan Brigantia. I could be called Yehuda Elmet. It's usually not combined with other honorifics, so you wouldn't say, Master Ryan Brigantia or Lord Yehuda Elmet. It's, we don't really title stack, so that's a common form of address, especially in the heraldic community. We also sometimes informally talk to each other, address each other by title alone. This is usually used in things like email between heralds or in commentary. Someone might post something, and Alice Eastern Crown may post something, and I may reply, yeah, I agree with Eastern Crown. It's just a shorthand. You wouldn't use that in a formal setting, but it's not at all unusual informally. All right. So how do you become a herald? Unfortunately, this is a tough one to answer across kingdoms. In the East, you become a herald when you decide you're a herald. Many kingdoms require heralds to be warranted. This is usually connected to handling money. In the East, since since heralds at large don't handle money, we really don't require warranting or anything of that nature. Many heralds, once warranted, have to do periodic reports. Again, that's kingdom dependent. We don't do that in the East, although group heralds are required to report because that's a laurel requirement. If you're a group herald, if you've been chosen by your local branch to be the branch herald, if you're not a group herald, then you're a herald at large. The only thing that is universally important is access to a system called OSCAR. We'll talk much more about it later in the class, but in order to access it, you must be authorized by your kingdom principal herald. Otherwise, you will not have access. So that's not up. That's really the only thing you have to do here in the East. Again, other kingdoms you may need to be warranted. Websites. There's a lot of very useful websites that you should learn and use and love. Again, you don't need to write them down. They're here they're going to be in the handout. The first one is the main website for the SCA College of Arms, heraldry.sca.org. It has all of the rules of the College of Arms. It has a lot of articles on names and on device armory. It has the archives of what's called Letters of Acceptance and Return, LOARs. We'll talk about those later. And it has contact info for all the senior heralds. This really is the main website you need to know. You will be using it constantly. Most Kingdom College of Heralds have a website. I didn't list them. You should probably know your own. Quite honestly, I've yet to find a kingdom where if you go to Google and type in, such and such kingdom, space, heraldry, it won't come up as the first or second item. So these are not hard to find. Many kingdoms have a separate submissions website. That's really the key one for us as book heralds. That's usually where you'll find forms, submission forms, instructions on how to submit them. Every kingdom has one, as far as I know. I've listed East Ethelmark and Mid-Realm there. But if you're from another kingdom, again, just type into Google, N-tier submissions heraldry, and it'll probably be the first thing that comes up, or whichever kingdom you may be from.
Right. There is actually a onto your site, but we actually just use Big Oscar.
Okay. Right. No, I'm not talking about Oscar now. Oscar is a separate thing. I'm just talking about the website where you go to download forms.
Right. Okay.
Or find out what address to mail them to, things like that. We'll get to Oscar in a few dozen more slides. So the next site that I find to be tremendously important is the Academy of St. Gabriel, s-gabriel.org. This is not an official SCA website. It's a group of very knowledgeable SCA heralds that kind of came together and said, we will help people with complicated name documentation issues. You used to be able to submit a question to them, and they would give you an answer. They don't really do that anymore. They've pretty much shut that down just due to lack of manpower. However, they have a huge amount of information available, and it's broken down into three main parts. There's the Medieval Name Archives, which has articles on medieval naming. This is one of the best resources for documenting a name for a client. There's Medieval Heraldry Archive, which has articles on armory and also links to many period armorials, places where you can look at what period armory looked like, which is very valuable to do. And then there's the Academy Reports, which is the answers to those questions that they used to accept but don't anymore. They've still been archived there, and they're a good source for names and as well. There are a number of mailing lists that you should join if you're going to be practicing Herald. The first is the SCA Heralds mailing list. The website to sign up for it is there. This is the main SCA Heraldry website. Pretty much every senior herald in the SCA is on it. It can be a little bit intimidating, but it's really the best place to ask complex questions. If you have, a really tough technical question, that's where I go with it. Help, I need somebody who can document stuff from Mongolia. Well, I don't know anyone who does Mongolian offhand. That's where I would ask that. Pretty much every kingdom has its own list. They're all listed on the main heraldry site on that next URL. The East Kingdom one is listed on here. Many kingdoms also have an education list. The East Kingdom does. That's a great resource if you have one, and that's the place to ask kind of questions where you think they're kind of beginner questions, the kind of things that are covered in this class, or where do I find my forms, what kind of markers do I need to use? That's a really good place for that sort of thing. There's also a very, very active Facebook group, SCA Heraldry Chat. It is a great place to hang out to learn about heraldry. We do what's called virtual consultation there. People come up, say, hey, I have an idea for a name or for a device. I can't, can you help me? Can you give me advice? And there's a number of very senior heralds there, as well as, new heralds and intermediate heralds who help there. It's a great place to learn. It's a great place to get your kind of toes wet. There's also a Google Plus community, SCA Heraldry. Frankly, I think there have been about 4 posts there in the last 6 months, and 3 of those were probably me announcing these classes. So not real active. Rules. So what are the rules, or more importantly, where do we find them? The most important part of our rule set is what's called SENA, the Standards for Evaluation of Names in Armory, and the link to it is right there. These are the current rules that govern all of the submissions. They're broken up into 4 main sections: general principles, personal names, non-personal names, and armory. This is usually where I get the question of what's a non-personal name. A non-personal name is just what it sounds like. It's the name of a group, a household, an award, anything that's not an individual. Personal names and non-personal names will be covered in the names classes. Armory will be covered in the armory classes. We will be talking about general principles in this class. This scene also includes 13 appendices, which are tremendously useful, but we will discuss them in the subject matter classes because they really pertain to names and armory. So, rule GP1A. First off, let's talk about the naming convention. Every rule in SINA starts with a section. GP is general principles, PN is personal names, NPN is non-personal names, A is armory. And then they are numbered and lettered alternatingly. So it'll be things like 1A, 2B, 3C, so it's pretty easy to find. This is rule GP1A, the very first thing, and it's the only rule that I promise I will quote to you directly, but it is important because this is a quote from Corpora that establishes what the SCA College of Heralds, College of Arms does. And it says, Laurel shall define standards suitable to the type of items to be registered and apply them uniformly to all such submissions. This is why Laurel makes these rules. And what do these rules need to do? The important things here are avoid undue confusion and develop unique, historically valid names and armory. That's the kind of the heart of our authority. We're required by Corpora to register to make sure names and armory is unique. We have a lot of people that will say something like, well, why do we register names? I mean, there were lots of John Smiths. Why can't we have a lot of John Smiths? And the answer is because it says so right there. It's a silly answer, but that's the way it is. The College of Heralds has no authority over that. I've heard lots of people that wax very passionately that we shouldn't register names, and it may be a legitimate argument or not. It doesn't really matter to me, but the College of Arms is not who makes that decision. That's a board of directors decision. We're required by the board to make names unique. Same thing with armory. The last bit of it is the develop unique, historically valid names in armory is where our style rules come from. We require names in armory to look and sound medieval, not modern. Which brings us to GP1B1. It says submissions should be reasonably period. So what does that mean? It means that they have to be comprised of period elements. Well, what's an element? An element is the smallest piece of a submission. If it's a name, it's each part of the name. My name is Yehuda ben Moshe. It's made up of, that's two elements, Yehuda and ben Moshe. And we want every element to be period, which means it has to be documentable. Same thing with armory. Every charge, every pattern that you put in your armory has to be period. You cannot call yourself Moon Unit, because that's not a period name. You cannot put a molecule on your armory, even though that's done in modern British armory. There are people out there with molecules on their names. Not a period charge. They didn't use them in the Middle Ages. We don't use them today. You also have to combine names in a period fashion, which means just because your elements are period doesn't mean they're combined right. The example I'll give you is from German. There's a perfectly period German by name Siebermacher. There's another one, Hofmeister. These are period German, what we would call last names. We can document them. We know people in the Middle Ages were called them. Does not mean that you can call yourself Siebermacher Hofmeister, because what they didn't do is they didn't stick two last names together. You would have given names, and you'd have a first name and a last name. That's what we mean by period combinations. So the rules, SINA defines something called core style, which covers most common elements and combinations. And as long as you stay within core style, it's pretty easy to do a registration. You don't really need to document much. You just kind of have to show that you're within the parameters of core style. If you want to go outside core style, that's fine. But now you have to deal with something called an individually attested pattern, which is basically you have to show that something was done in period that doesn't follow our rules. This is most common in armory. So for example, one of our rules in armory is you can't put a black charge on a red background. You can't have a black lion on a red field because the contrast is low and that wasn't done much in Anglo-Norman armory, which is what forms our core style. However, it was done all the time in Germany. Germany's full of black on red and red on black stuff. So you can register it. You just have to show that it was done in Germany and in the exact way you want to do it. The logic being, evidence of period practice is always going to trump our rules. If you can prove something is period, doesn't matter what our rule says, we'll accept it, mostly. The second part says submission should be free of conflict, presumption, or offense. So let's first talk about what these are and define them. Conflict says you can't have a submission that's very close to another SCA registration. So if I register the name John Smith, you don't get to register John Smith. You probably don't get to register John the Smith either, because that's awfully close. However, I can give you permission to conflict with me. So if you want to register John the Smith, I can write you a letter and saying, you know, I'm John Smith, and I'm okay with you registering John the Smith. It's fine. Go ahead. And now you can register. We still won't register identical names. So if I'm John Smith, I can't let you also register John Smith. There's got to be some difference. Now, presumption prohibits submissions that are too close to an important non-SCA person or ones that claim some kind of a special power or position. So, Harry Potter is a wonderfully period documentable English name. You may not register Harry Potter because there's a rather famous fictional character with that name. Even if you go to J.K. Rowling and she gives you a letter saying, yes, it's okay for you to use Harry Potter, we will still not register it. You cannot get permission to avoid a presumption problem, only a conflict problem. Similarly, names that claim special powers. You know, you can't call yourself John King of England because you're claiming to be King of England and you're not. And even if you are King of England, you're not King of England in the SCA. So Queen Elizabeth doesn't get to register Queen of England either, if she, you know, joined the SCA. The last one is offense. Offense prohibits submissions that are offensive to the populace of the SCA or to the general public. This is a modern standard. The swastika is a period charge. You cannot put a swastika on your device. It's just too offensive to the modern audience. We had a recent submission where someone wanted to put testicles on their charge, on their device. Turns out it's a perfectly period charge. We found several examples of it. The decision was that no, that's going to offend too many people. The important thing to notice about these three, conflict, presumption, and offense, is that these are modern requirements. These are modern requirements of the SCA as a modern organization. They have nothing to do with period. You cannot document your way out of conflict, presumption, or offense. For example, the testicles being an example. We can document that testicles were done. They're still offensive by today's standards. Okay, so what exactly is period? The SCA defines its period as the period before 1600. So anything from before 1600 is mostly allowed. We also have something called the gray period. This is the period from 1600 to 1650, and we will allow elements from the gray period for registration. And the logic is things didn't usually appear out of nowhere. If we find evidence of somebody born in 1612 whose name is John Smith, that's probably not the first John Smith in history. Chances are good that his father was called John Smith, or his uncle, or his grandfather. So we're going to give the submitter the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, if you find that name in that period, we will register it because it was probably used before that. But now 1650 is a hard cutoff. If you find it in 1651, you're out. You know, you got a 50-year leeway, and that's it. Now, the exception to that is things we know didn't occur before 1600. And there's a few examples of these. For example, Shakespeare invented several names. If the first occurrence of a name is in a Shakespearean play published in 1602, we know it wasn't in use before 1600. You can't use the gray period allowance. Things like that. There is no official beginning time. You know, the SCA doesn't have a start date, but the rule is the names and devices have to be from cultures that were known to medieval and Renaissance Europe. So classical Greek and Roman cultures were well known to medieval and Renaissance Europeans, so you can use classic Greek and Roman names or charges. However, Pharaonic Egypt was not known to in the Middle Ages. It didn't really become known to Europeans until the 19th century, I believe. So you cannot, call yourself Ramses or, Tet or whatever, even though the argument can be made, but those are from before 1600. They are, but they weren't known in Europe. Place. The corpora defines Europe as kind of the center of the SCA organization, so pretty much anything from Europe is allowed, and Europe is basically, as far east as Russia, as far south as Greece and Italy and Spain. It does not include the Middle East. It probably doesn't include Muslim Spain. Here things change a little bit between names and armory. Names from other cultures that had contact with period Europe are allowed for people and households, but not for SCA branches. So the idea being that people traveled, and the SCA will allow you to say, I'm a traveler from China here visiting you in medieval Europe. But the groups have to be located in Europe. The group didn't travel from China. So even though a canton or a shire might be in China, they have to use a European name. You also have to show that the culture had contact with medieval Europe. So, for example, Native Americans that lived on the East Coast, sure, absolutely. There were explorers by 1600 and settlers and whatnot. But probably not from the interior of the continent. So if you have a name that from a Native American tribe that was only in the interior of the continent before 1600, you can't use that because you're not going to be able to show that they had contact. Armory is a little bit different. Basically, non-European heraldic elements and patterns are allowed, but there's stricter rules on how to use them, and we'll address that in more detail in the armory class. We're mostly talking about Islamic heraldry and Japanese mon. Those are the two biggest non-European heraldic cultures that we deal with. So some definitions that are important. Attested means week founded in period. If we take a book that's a register of births from a parish in England in 1512, and that register says on such and such a date baptized was John Smith, well, we now know that John and Smith are period names by attestation. We have evidence of them in use in that form in period. We will also allow constructed names. For example, let's say we have the attested name John, and we have the attested name Robertson, meaning son of Robert. That can be used to construct Johnson, the son of John, as a construct name, even if we don't ever find Johnson as a period name. We will, realistically, but we can construct names or devices that way. Precedent. If any of you are familiar with the American or English legal system, you'll know that in the legal system you have laws that are set by statute, by Congress, by legislature, and you have laws that are set by the courts, by precedent. The SCA heraldry works a very similar way. The rules of submission, the SINA, are statutes, and the decisions of Laurel, Wreath, and Pelican are the precedent. So once one of the sovereigns of arms rules on something, that forms precedent and is binding in the future. It may be changed, but generally it's binding. Documentation. Documentation is important, especially with names. We want to document things, and you may know the terms primary, secondary, tertiary documentation. We don't really care about primary versus secondary versus tertiary. We have different requirements. So primary documentation means you're looking at the original object, a medieval manuscript with a name in it, a medieval roll of arms with a picture of the device you want to try to register. that's good. That's golden. You're done. That's not always possible. Most of the time, we have to rely on secondary documentation, which is to say things people have written about primary documentation. That's perfectly acceptable if it's something that we consider reliable. So what's reliable? We're looking for several things. We're looking for that it came from a reputable source. In other words, it's an academic publication, or if it was a publication specifically for the SCA, that it was published by someone who, we know knows what they're talking about. Generally, anything on the heraldry.sca.org website, anything on the St. Gabriel's website is reputable and usable. However, websites like research the history of your Irish name is not, because it might be very good, but it might not be. We have no idea who put it together, what sources they relied on, how they processed their information. The other thing we're looking for in the secondary sources is we want to make sure the items are dated. So, someone saying this name is of ancient Irish origin. Well, we don't know what ancient Irish origin means. What we want to see is something that says this name was in use in 1312. Okay, that's something meaningful. And we also want to make sure that names aren't modernized, or sometimes called normalized. A lot of books, especially things like kids' books, books about heritage, modernize names. They list them in their modern spelling, not their period spelling. That's no good. We want sources that keep the original spellings because that's what we register, the original spellings. Wikipedia is right out. It's a real good way to get a return if the only thing you've cited is Wikipedia. However, Wikipedia is a good place to start your research because it may give you ideas where to go, and very often the bibliography in the Wikipedia, the sources Wikipedia uses, are good sources that could be used, but not Wikipedia itself. Step from period practice. This used to be called weirdnesses. You'll sometimes see that in older documents. This is only for armory. It's not used for names. A step from period practice means we're pretty sure this was not done in period, but it's very close to something that was done. So we will allow it kind of conditionally. Basically, you're allowed one step from period practice. You're not allowed two. If your submission has two of them, it gets returned. The classic example is the howling wolf. Lots of people like that kind of wolf howling at the moon posture that you see so much in the American Southwest with coyotes and such. We've never seen a period example of a wolf howling at the moon in period heraldry, ever. But we do see animals in all kinds of weird poses, and it's really not that weird a pose, so we will allow it, but it's a step from period practice. The next thing the next set of rules is the administrative handbook. There's the URL for it. This covers procedures. It covers the submission procedures, and it also covers what's called non-submission actions, reconsiderations, appeals, heraldic wills, a few other things. So what are they? A reconsideration means you submitted a name and they've changed it, and now you would like them to undo that change because you don't think it was a good change. Or you submitted a name and they registered it, but they mentioned that there's a better version of that name, and now you want to switch to that version. The key thing to the reconsideration is you've already registered something, and now you want it to be slightly different. The other important non-submission action is an appeal. This is where it was returned, either by Kingdom or by Laurel. They said, this is no good, take it back. And you disagree, either because you found new documentation or you have a new argument to make. You're appealing the decision to return. Heraldic wills. Heraldic wills are tremendously important. Encourage your clients to use them. If someone passes away, the control over their name and device goes to their legal heirs. Those legal heirs may be hard to find. Those legal heirs may not be SCA members. This can cause problems and has caused problems in the past. We had an unfortunate incident in the East within the last few years where a beloved baron of a barony passed away, and it turned out his kids hate the SCA. They really dislike it, they want nothing to do with us, and they will absolutely not speak with anyone about his name and armory. If you have a heraldic will, you can just say who is going to deal with your name and armor. The administrative handbook also covers the duties of senior heralds. It has a bunch of appendices, a few of which are of particular interest. So Appendix D has standard form letters. You don't have to use them, but we encourage you to use them, because if you use the standard form letters, you will definitely be okay. If you use a different letter, you may miss something that's important. So letters include permission to conflict, heraldic wills, also things like transfers. I want to register my device to you. Petitions. These are important when a branch registers names or armory. Releases. I have this registration. I don't want it anymore. Release it. Someone else can use it. Can register it if they want to. Appendix F lists name sources to avoid. These are books of names that we know are no good. Don't use them. Appendix H is what's called sources that don't require photocopies. Generally speaking, when you submit documentation, you have to include a copy of that documentation with a submission. Print out from a web page, photocopy from a book, whatever. Appendix H lists a number of books and websites that you don't have to do that with. The important thing to note is that this is a list of common books, books that most senior heralds have. It's not necessarily a list of good books. Don't do what I did and use it as a shopping list. There are many items on that list that are not worth buying, as I learned to much annoyance after having bought several of these when I was newer at this game. So the next set of rules is what's called the Glossary of Terms. It's currently under revision. There's going to be a new version of it very soon. And the web page is there. It defines a lot of terms. It's exactly as it sounds. It also has a number of important tables, regalia, reserved and restricted charges, things that you can't use, standard tinctures and postures, stuff that is useful. We'll talk more about that in the Armory class. It also lists a number of terms that are frequently misused. Not words that are necessarily wrong to use, but just that are commonly not used correctly. I encourage you to take a look at those in your spare time. So here's the submissions process. The submission process generally starts with a consultation. This is a process where a herald helps a client choose and document a name or device to register. Some kingdoms require this. The only way you can register is to go through a local or at-large herald. Other kingdoms, you can just take your packet and send it right to your submissions herald. This will vary kingdom to kingdom. In the East, you can send it right to the kingdom submissions herald. You never need to speak to a herald. It may be a good idea to speak to a herald, but you don't have to. Once the consultation happens, in some kingdoms, the consulting herald takes the filled out forms and the payment and forwards them to the submissions herald. Here in the East, even if a herald consulted, the client or the submitter still sends it off themselves to the submissions herald. I think some kingdoms you have to send payment through the local exchequer. That's going to vary. That's probably going to be on the submissions website for your kingdom. Once the letters have made it to the internal submissions herald, as Victor can tell us, it goes on what's called the internal letter of intent. Some kingdoms it's called the letter of presentation. This collects a number of submissions for what's called in-kingdom commentary. Here in the East, we usually do this once a month, and it includes the last month's letters, except after Pennsic, where we break it up over a few months. This is issued by Senior Kingdom Herald, this letter of intent. In our case, in the East, it's Eastern Crown Herald. And as far as I was told, at least 2 of the kingdoms in the society don't use internal letters of intent. Once something is on a letter of intent, it goes into internal commentary. This is a period during which heralds, mostly from within the kingdom, but some out-of-kingdom heralds do it too, can comment on the submissions. This is a great learning opportunity. If you want to be a book herald, get involved in kingdom commentary. It's the #1 place to learn this stuff. You're highly encouraged to comment. You're highly encouraged to ask questions. It doesn't have to be a useful comment. It could just be something like, hey, this person said so at X, Y, and Z. I don't understand. Please, can you explain it? Perfectly okay in kingdom commentary. You can also be useful even with things that take very little knowledge. For example, verifying documentation. The person's documented this name from this article online. Well, click on the article. Go look at it. Does it actually say what the submission says it does? If it does, you can post documentation verified. That's actually a very useful thing to do. And if you find that the person didn't really represent the information correctly, it doesn't matter why. It could be intentional, it could be unintentional. Definitely say so, because maybe now we need to look at for new documentation. Maybe documentation's not supporting what they're claiming. Duration of internal commentary varies. Here in the East, that's usually 1 month. The important thing is names and device emblazons can be updated if a problem is found. You know, someone submits a device and they say, you know, this really doesn't work. That color is the wrong color, or that charge is in the wrong place. No problem. The client or somebody else can redraw it, send it up to the submissions herald. It's probably okay to fix it. And as I said, it's not used in all kingdoms. After commentary, there's a decision meeting. Again, not every kingdom does this. A senior kingdom herald makes a decision as to which submissions have significant problems. Anything that has a significant problem gets sent back to the client for more work. Anything without problem gets passed on. A few kingdoms, I know Ethelmark and Meridies, hold these over video conference and open them to the general public. It's a great learning opportunity. If you ask, you can jump in, watch it. As long as they're not full, they'll usually give preference to their internal heralds from within the kingdom, but if they're not full, they'll be happy to have other people commenting. Good place to learn. Some kingdoms only do decision meetings. There's no internal letter, there's no internal commentary, there's just a decision. So then there's a kingdom letter of decision. Senior Kingdom Herald makes those decisions and publishes the results. Again, it's Eastern Crown in the East. Those without any problems are forwarded up to the Laurel level. Those with problems get returned for further work. Once a letter of decision is issued, somebody prepares an external letter of intent. This is similar to the internal letter, but in this case it includes those that are forwarded by Kingdom to Laurel. A Senior Kingdom Herald in the East, that's Blue Tiger Herald, currently Jocelyn the Squirrel, puts this together, and it often goes to the Society for external commentary. This is a period during which heralds from the entire SCA can comment on it. Most of the time, this commentary is done by more senior heralds. New heralds are encouraged to read it. If your Kingdom Principal Herald allows you to read it, it's a great learning tool, but you probably don't want to be commenting here until you've got some experience, unless you have some special knowledge. So I'm a native speaker of Russian. I was commenting on, I frequently commented on Russian names because I had special knowledge, the language, long before I was willing to comment on anything else. Because you know, I didn't really know enough about anything else to meaningfully comment at this level, but I did have that extra edge, so I helped out with Russian names. External commentary is always 2 months, and the important thing here is that names can be changed, but device emblazons, device pictures cannot. So if a problem is discovered at this level, that device is either going to pass or fail on its merits. We can't go in and substitute a different image. After the close of commentary, there's a decision meeting. Pelican Queen of Arm rules on names, Wreath Queen of Arm rules on armory. This is done at a meeting where other senior heralds participate, and I'm actually wrong there. I put in that they do this by video conference. I actually just found out that it's not by video conference. They actually use chat-type programs like IRC and instant messages. I did not know that. I do not participate in those. I'm not quite that senior. Once those meetings occur and this Queens of Arm make their decisions, it goes into a proofreading process. There are 2 rounds of proofreading. It takes about a month. One thing you should be aware of is that if you happen to know any of the proofreaders, they're sworn to secrecy. They're not allowed to give you a preview of the decisions. Please don't ask them. I know several proofreaders that purposefully keep the fact that they're proofreaders secret because they don't want to be harassed for previews. Letter of acceptance and returns. Once everything in proofreading is done, the decisions are officially published on the letter of acceptance and return. It goes out once per month by email and is posted at the URL I listed there. This is where the name or device are officially done. Until it's on the letter of acceptance and return, it is not official. Everything before that is guesswork. There's a tendency where a herald will see negative commentary on something they worked on. You do a device for a submitter. It goes into commentary. Someone says that device is not registerable because it's that shade of brown is too brown. I don't know, something. And they say, oh no, that's not going to get registered. They go back to the client and they say the device isn't registered. Let's withdraw and start over. This is a bad idea. Until that letter of acceptance and return is issued, you don't know what happens. Maybe that herald is wrong. Maybe that herald forgot some important rule. Until the sovereign of arms make their decisions, don't assume it's going to fail, even if there's some negative commentary. The letters of the LOARs are organized into acceptances, returns, and what's called pens, which is when a device is delayed because, for whatever reason, the sovereigns want more commentary on it. And then within those categories, it's subdivided by kingdom of submissions. There's also usually a cover letter, which has organizational information and some important rulings and such. So let's take a look at a letter of acceptance and returns. Here's a chunk of one. I hope you can see it well enough. This is from a number of months ago. But you can see at the top it says Drachenwald acceptances and then none. There are no acceptances for Drachenwald. What it probably means is that in that particular month, the Kingdom of Drachenwald did not put in an external letter. Not every kingdom puts in a letter every month. Most kingdoms occasionally skip. More interestingly, we have Eldervere's acceptances. Angela Fabrici, device, such and such, accepted. Aspartha Ryland of Buchanan, badge, accepted. Another badge, accepted. A third badge that she owns jointly with Edward the Red, accepted. Edward the Red has a badge, also accepted. These are now officially registered. The moment that letter of acceptance and returns came out, they became officially registered. And then we go on. Next kingdom, Glenavon, acceptances. So that's what a letter of acceptance and returns looks like. Oscar. Oscar is the online system for commentary and response. And there's the URL for it. This is where all of the commentary and all of the letters of intent happen. It is the greatest thing since sliced bread if you did heraldry back in the old days. When I started, we did all of this by paper, by mail, which means a letter of intent would be physically mailed to every person who it's supposed to be on. We would write a letter with comments and then have to mail it to every other person on the mailing list. A typical senior herald would spend upwards of $40 in postage per month to do all this. That's how much paperwork went back and forth. The online system is wonderful. So Oscar is broken up into two big chunks. There's the main part, which contains the external letters of intent and Laurel commentary, and there's what's called Kingdom Gardens, which contain the internal letters of intent and the kingdom level commentary. There are some parts of Oscar that have public access. They're freely open to anyone, not just heralds. Anyone can see all the external letters and some of the internal letters, but usually not the commentary. A few kingdoms allow commentary to be seen by anyone. I think Middle is one. This is very useful for your client to be able to check his or her own submission status. If they go to that website and click Substatus on the left, they can see where in the pipeline their name or device is. However, that only works once it's made it to an external letter. Substatus will not show what's going on inside the kingdoms. How do you create an account? It's very complicated. You click Create Account and fill out the form. And then you contact your kingdom's principal herald and ask them to have it activated for commenting. Some kingdoms require you to be warranted before they do that. In the East, it's about as easy as you can get. Ryan usually approves everybody as soon as he sees it going in. So not a big deal here. Here's what Oscar looks like. This is the main page of Oscar. You can see in the middle there's some like site news, where Tanzo Sistwan is the person who maintains Oscar and posts updates there. But the interesting things happen on the left and on top. And there you have your navigation bars. Some of them are self-explanatory, like log out and new password. There's links to things like SINA, Administrative Handbook. The ones I find most interesting are Track, which gives you a table that lists all the recent external letters of intent. That's usually how I find them. Substatus is the one I mentioned that's useful for your clients to track their own submissions. And then if you click on Kingdom, that will take you to your Kingdom Garden. And the Kingdom Garden looks like this. This is the East Kingdom Garden from whenever it is I took this picture. You can see across the top, there's all the other kingdoms are listed, so you can switch to different kingdoms. And right in the middle there is the East ILOI. This one happens to be dated April 2013 because that's when I took this screenshot. And you also have kingdom-specific news in the middle there. So, before I go into this slide, I need to give you some background. Every April, yeah, Kaylee knows why. Every April 1st, we put together silly letters of intent. We try to document names and devices that are patently silly, and we put them up and we comment on them and we have a jolly good time. This is a screenshot from one of these. This is the submission of the name Force Field, which, yes, somebody was able to document as a period English name, complete with a device of a little shield ship in space surrounded by a force field. The point here is not about the force field. The point of here is to see how the Oscar system looks. So this is the overall view, and if we zoom in a bit, we can see the header. The first thing we see in the header is what's called notification toggles, where it says name notification on, turn off, badge notification on, turn off. I find this to be very, very useful. If you have a device or a name you're particularly interested in, you click on that, and then every time someone comments on it, you will get an email saying, hey, somebody commented on this item. Personally, because I'm mostly an Armory Herald, less a Names Herald, I go through every letter of intent and turn on notification for every single piece of Armory. I want to see all the Armory comments. Names, I'll turn on if I'm particularly interested in the name. Maybe it's one of my clients. Maybe it's a Russian name that I'm helping with, or just something that interests me. They're very handy. The next thing we have is the blazon, the written description of the device. Argent, azure, a lymphod argent with an annulet, or all between 4 mullets and saltire argent. All right. We always have 3 pictures of the device, what we call emblazons. The first one is a black and white one, line drawing. The second one is the scan of the colored one. And the third one is what we call the color corrected. It's hard to see here. You might see that the yellows are a little different and the blues are a little different. We use this to standardize colors so that we can see if the color really means what it says it means. There's a known problem between blues and purples. Purples are frequently picked up as blues. We're working on it. And then the next thing you have is documentation, where it says, well, how do we document this? So it says Force is a late period surname which is usable as a given name by precedent, and here's the reference for where we found Force, etc. Below that, we have commentary. You can see that someone by the name of Gunvor or Silvar, whose heraldic title is Oral, posted, and commentary is threaded. When you can reply to a comment and it'll be offset, and you can see down lower that Tanzo Sistvan, non-scripta herald, responded to Gunvor with a response. So that's the way the commentary works, and if you click reply, it'll add a reply. Oscar privileges. These are set by your kingdom principal heralds. They may include viewing and commenting on your kingdom's internal letters, on other kingdoms' internal letters, or on the external letters. Again, different kingdoms have different approaches to this. The East Kingdom here, we tend to give everybody all the permissions, go do what you want. Other kingdoms say, no, we'll only give you internal letters for our kingdom, and you have to have some seniority before we will let you out into the big world of external. I can't comment on which policy is right, but they do differ. Precedents. And precedent is very important. As I mentioned, a lot of our rules come from precedent. It's set on the LOARs only. No amount of commentary creates a precedent. Rulings and registrations create precedent, or in the cover letter sometimes precedents are set. It's important to note that if something is registered without comment, that does not create a precedent. We have a saying that prior registration is not a guarantee of future registration. If I submit John Smith and nobody notices that that's not a registrable name and they register it, that doesn't mean you can come back and say, hey, he registered John Smith, I want to do that too. If there's no text, then it's not a precedent. So let's look at a few examples of things that are not precedents. I'm going to read these because I don't know how clear it is. Angela Fabrici, device for Chevron, Cantervare, or in Azure and Rules. This submitter has permission to conflict with the device of Tanzo Sistron. Blazing. That's not a precedent. That's just an explanation. Well, you know, so that next, if someone looks and says, wait a minute, that device conflicts. How did they get it registered? Well, because there was a permission to conflict. There was no new rule set. There was no rule clarified here. It's just a note. Similarly, on the next one, Nathaniel Lennox, we have a text that says, please advise the submitter to draw the grenade larger to take up the available space. Yes, you can register grenades. Again, that's not a precedent. That's a what we call an artist's note. It's saying draw this slightly different, but it's not telling us how to draw grenades. It's just saying this particular grenade needs some tweaking. No general rule is set. Sometimes things look like rules, but they're really unique to the particular submission. These are returns now. Bridget McGregor's badge, a thistle slipped argent. This badge is returned for redraw, for violating the rule. It says elements must be drawn to be identifiable. Without the leaves but with a prominent stem, commenters had a difficult time identifying this charge. The submitter may be interested in something else. So this is not a rule. This doesn't tell us how to draw thistles. It just says this particular thistle is not well drawn. Here's another return. Bridget Larkin, a device. It's returned for conflict. Okay. Again, no new rule set here. It's just saying we're returning it because we found a conflict. So what does a precedent look like? Let's take a look at it. Tamara of Dragon's End. Device. For pale, embattled, or in Azure, a ram and a goat. Combatant counterchanged. This device is returned for conflict with the device of Antonio Tagliaferro. For pale, something else. There's a DC between goats and rams, but not a substantial change. So this is not clear of conflict. There's also no difference granted between the dovetailed and embattled complex line of division. Therefore, there's not enough. So let me unpack that. A DC is what's called a distinct change. When we're dealing with conflicts of armory, any devices have to have two DCs, two distinct changes in order to be registered. We also have something called a substantial change, which is a change so big that just one of them is enough. So this ruling actually set three different precedents. The first precedent is saying there's a DC between a goat and a ram. So from now on, anytime someone's checking for conflict, a device with a goat against a device with a ram, they can rely on the fact that there is a DC between them. However, the ruling says there's not a substantial change. So there's no substantial change between a goat and a ram. That's a second precedent. Finally, it says there's no DC between a dovetailed and embattled complex line of division. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. We'll talk about that in the armory class. But again, that's a precedent. It's saying, you know, there's no DC there. They're the same for conflict purposes. Very often you need to write down precedent. So how do you cite it? I call this the standard citation format in quotes because it's really not a standard. People tend to write it however they want. I'd like to encourage people to write it in this fashion, but the important thing is you include all of the elements. The name of the person, an A or an R depending on whether it was accepted or returned, the kingdom of submission, and the date, month and year of the letter of acceptance and return. You don't need the day because we only issue one a month. If it's the cover letter, you just say the cover letter. So I really encourage people to, when you're commenting and you're listing a precedent, write it in this form. It makes it very clear. The precedents have been collected at that website, but I don't think they're actually at all useful on that website. The reason they're not useful is because they're organized by the Laurel tenure, by who was Laurel. So first of all, they're outdated. Armor's only been updated through July of 2008. Names only through May of 2005. So we're, years and years behind. And second, I don't really find it to be very useful to organize it chronologically. If I want to know about goats and rams, I want to look under goat or ram. I don't really care if the precedent was said by Bruce Draconarius or by Daud bin Auda. I want to know what the rule on goats and rams is. Name precedents have been compiled, but only through May 2004. This is more useful because at least it's dealing with, at least it's organized not by chronology but by subject. And there's several ongoing projects to categorize this better. I have one that I do. There's a few others. But right now, the best way to find precedent is by searching it through a website called morsalis.org. Morsalis is the Herald that maintains our ordinary and armorial, our list of everything that's been registered. And what he has there is basically Google custom searches. If you go to the top box and type in some text, it will search all the letters of acceptance and returns for your text. The lower box searches the collected precedents. Again, I don't really find that to be terribly useful. I've never used it. What I don't have on here is there's now a third search box on this page, which lets you search name articles. Very, very useful, but not quite complete yet. We'll talk about that in the names class. That's almost the end of our presentation. I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. The first is the difference between registrable and authentic. Anything that's submitted has to be registrable. It does not have to be authentic. So if someone comes up with a name or with a device that you know is going to pass, but really isn't very authentic, it doesn't look like period heraldry, it doesn't sound like a period name, but it meets our rules, it's your job to submit it. You know, you might want to encourage your client to come up with something more authentic. You may want to mention better options, but we can't and we shouldn't force it. Okay? It's their decision, not yours. You know, this is a customer service job. It's our job to help our clients, our submitters. We want to help registrations happen. We don't want to make them not happen. We never want to say, no, this is so ugly, I'm not going to submit it for you. That's the wrong way to do this. If you're consulting, help people come up with devices and names they like. If you're commenting, look for reasons to allow their registration, not to prohibit it. In practice, you do both, but it's one thing if you say, this, you know, this violates this rule, and so it's not registered. It's better to say, this violates that rule, but here's a workaround. If maybe, you know, you can't have this item in that spot, but maybe if he moves it over to the left and makes it a bigger, it's going to be okay. Try to help people get things registered. We want a reputation for being helpful, not obstructionist. Unfortunately, the heralds in the SCA have a bit of a reputation as a bunch of people that are there to say no. We really want to get around over that reputation. We really, you know, even if you have to say no, sometimes you do. I had one client that came to me, and I swear she kept redrawing her device. I swear she hit every single rule we have. You know, every version of her device violated a new rule. But you still, you know, unless they're really obnoxious, you've got to work with them. You got to help them through it. You got to be positive and give them ideas and suggestions on how to come up with something they can register. Now, if you can't or don't want to do that, that's okay too. You can still be a herald. Just don't be a consultant herald. We have people that are commenting heralds or that are research heralds. All they do is do research. That's fine. That's incredibly useful. But if you're going to do consultations, you know, keep this in mind. Keep in mind that we want our clients to be happy. So, I'm Elmet Herald. I'm the East Kingdom Heraldic Education Deputy. You can reach me either through the East Kingdom email or directly. And this handout can be found at the URL at the bottom. If you go to yehudaheraldry.com and click on the big East Kingdom Heraldic University link in the middle, it will take you to the East Kingdom Heraldic University page, which has this handout both as a PowerPoint and as a PDF. It will also have a link to this video. Note, don't click there now. They're not up yet. I will put them up probably in half an hour to an hour or tomorrow morning, depending on when I feel like going to bed. but certainly by tomorrow morning it's going to be up. I'm hoping to eventually move it to all this to the East Kingdom's servers, but there have been some delays with that, so you can go to my page right for now. That's listed there, and once we've moved it, there will be a pointer. So if you only have that website, you're not going to lose track of it. That's the one website you should write down or make a note of or whatever, because it will lead you to everything else. And that's it. Questions?
No questions from me.
None from me.
I do actually have a comment about the device. I mean, on Oscar, how the device submission has the 3 pictures.
Yes.
It was explained to me. I mean, I like how you explained it because that also explains it. But it was explained to me that the 3rd image was a rasterization to show identifiability.
I don't believe that's actually correct. We can ask Istvan if he's still around, but the way it was explained to me by the person who developed Oscar and all that is that it was to standardize colors. We're hoping to eventually go to a all-electronic submission system, and part of that is, you know, blue on my computer monitor doesn't look the same as the blue on your computer monitor. It doesn't look the same as the blue on someone else's computer monitor. The idea of that is to check devices to make sure they're close enough to the standard colors that they want. It does help with identifiability. We have a rule of thumb very much that says if on the color-corrected image it's you can't make out what it is, that's a good hint that that item is too small or too poorly drawn to be identifiable. But that's not actually a rule. That's just kind of a practical impact.
Okay, that makes sense.
Anyone else?
Did they change the rules on printers?
Okay, the rules of printers have never changed, but they've also but many people also don't interpret them correctly. This is the Laurel rule, and I know some kingdoms have other rules. Here's the rule on printers. You're absolutely free to color print your device and submit it. There's nothing against it. However, many printers, especially cheaper inkjet printers, don't have very long-lasting ink. From the time you mail off your device to the time it crosses Reed's desk and she makes a final decision, as much as 9 months may pass. If in that time your beautiful red has faded to an orange, your device is going to get returned because we don't register orange. So, Alice, our submission herald, calls it printer roulette. If you're willing to take a chance on your printer lasting long enough to submit, by all means, do it. No one will. It's not prohibited. It's just discouraged. That being said, I have a color laser printer at home. I ran a test on it. I printed out a bunch of colors, put them out on the window. It's in direct sunlight and artificial light. And when 9 months passed with no sign of fading, I said, okay, I'm now using the color printing it. It's now been over a year. They're still holding up beautifully. I have no problem printing and submitting. But that's from my specific make and model printer. I can't say that that's every color laser or every Hewlett-Packard colored laser. I can say it's that printer.
Okay, I was just wondering because my printer uses pigment and not ink.
I am not a printer expert. It's a question of either run a test, although to be honest, at this point, if you wait a year while you're running the test, we may have all electronic submissions and it may become moot. Or, you know, if you want to take your chance, take your chance. But I'd hate to waste 9 months for it to fail because of that. You know,
okay.
Crayola markers are $1 a pack at Walmart.
Oh no, I bought them and I already
they're a pain in the ass.
them.
I agree. I hate them, but there's. Thank you, Ryan.
The exact ones I have, the classics.
Yeah, the preferred coloring tool is the classic, the Crayola markers classic palette. Washable or non-washable doesn't matter. I personally just like the non-washable ones better, but it should be the classic colors, not the pastels or the Cars 2 palette or whatever. The classic ones. So yeah, color printer is absolutely legal. What's not allowed is any kind of wax-based tools. Crayons, wax-based color pencils, that's actually prohibited. And the reason it's prohibited is because in the heat of whatever garage that all this paperwork ends up being stored in, the wax melts, and now you've not just destroyed your submission, but the 3 next to it as well. So any kind of wax-based medium will get it returned for that.
And just one last one. For the line piece that I think I'm holding up, I don't know if you can see it. That's a printout. They were saying that I should draw it.
No. I don't know who's telling you that. I've never seen anyone claim that a black and white submission is has a problem with being with color fading. If you look at my device, it's black and white. I printed it on a black and white laser and sent it off to them.
Okay.
No. Another common misconception is, well, it has to be line drawing. You can't have any filled-in areas. Not actually true. The rules say it has to be black and white. We encourage you to do line drawings because what we really want is line drawings. That's what makes it easy to see. But it's, you know, if you have a filled-in one, that's okay. It's not going to get returned for that. Again, kingdom may be different. I know there are a few kingdoms out there that say no laser printers. Okay. They're being more strict than Laurel. I can't do anything about it. I think someone was telling me that Lochak, Australia, they're actually keeping a registry of printers. You have to tell them what printer you used, and then if a submission fades, then that model printer is now banned forever.
That is awesome.
I think that's a little over the top, but it works for them, so you know, who am I to worry about it? But at the Laurel level, there is no limitation on printers, and you know, East follows Laurel on that.
Okay.
It's actually really funny because I'm not sure their kingdoms are supposed to do that, because I mentioned appeals. You can appeal from a kingdom decision or a Laurel decision, and the rule is if you appeal from a kingdom decision, kingdom cannot turn you down again. They must pass it on to Laurel for a decision. So you're in a kingdom that prohibits color printers. You submit a color printout. They return it. You tell them, okay, I'm appealing this decision to Laurel. They now have to pass it up to Laurel, and Laurel says, okay, it's color printed, no big deal, and accept it. So, you know, it's a little bit of a silly situation. I think the kingdoms, you know, again, suggestions, sure. Every kingdom, including the East, encourages people to not use laser printers, to use markers. But prohibiting that, I think I'm not sure I support that policy. But again, you know, I'm not the kingdom's principal herald for this or any other kingdom, so I'm not the one making those rules.
I was just double checking because I have a copy of the printer, the drawing, the marker. I have like a copy of everything. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's an issue of, like I said, Alice calls it printer roulette. If you luck out and your pigments or inks or dyes or whatever it is are color stable, great, no problem at all. But if they fade, you know, you just lost 9 months or whatever. Hopefully, we will soon ban all electronic submissions, and all of this is going to be irrelevant. Anything else? All right, I'm going to stop the recording at this time. Nope, hang on. I'm told to invite somebody else in. Hold on a second. Nope, there it is. Now, just make sure one of you guys mutes their mic, otherwise we're going to get a feedback loop.
Hang on. I got it.
Yeah, there it goes.
Bye, folks.
Hello.
And this is Master Ryan McWhite, Brigadier Principal Herald, who's sitting 90 degrees off around the corner from Kaylee.
It's like magic mirror.
Mute one of the mics, please.
Okay. There we go. Hi, guys. Just wanted to thank everyone for coming in, hanging out, and learning what you can learn. I wanted to thank Yehuda once again for running these classes. And I'm Ryan, Brigantia Principal Herald of the East. If you have any questions, brigantia@eastkingdom.org. And feel free to just pop me up, send emails, whatever.
Okay.
And Kaylee can just slap me upside the head if she wants. That's how she usually sends me emails.
All right. I am going to stop the
All right,
recording,
guys.
but
Thank you.
it doesn't mean you have to disconnect.